Righto, part 2. Okay, we're going to look at the concept of food-based dietary guidelines, which you are familiar with probably from the Eatwell plate, but they are used very widely internationally. We'll talk about why they're important. We'll look at 5 a day as well. And we'll also look at the National Dietary and Nutrition Survey, NDNS. Okay, so national example. The Eatwell plate is a good example of a national public health intervention. As we'll see, this approach is used around the world with interventions tailored to local populations. The Eatwell guide suggests how much we should eat based on particular food groups to achieve a healthy, balanced diet. You don't need to achieve this balance with every meal, but should try to get the balance right over a day or even a week. It's based on 5 food groups plus a recommendation of drinking 6 to 8 glasses of water a day. This is a breakdown of food groups in broad percentage terms. The total adds up to 101% because of rounding up. This is an example of a national dietary guideline. There are many of these around the world. We'll come back on this again in the second year module, Food Science and Nutrition, and Module 2, Semester 2 module, Food Science and Nutrition. This is linked to the European Food Information Council's resource on food-based dietary guidelines. I'll open to have a look at some of the varying guidelines. One key concept is that the guidelines are not ideal diets, but practical recommendations based on reality of what people eat in different regions. Okay, this is the resource. There's quite a lot of technical information what food-based dietary guidelines are, their history, recognising their value, how they're developed, so scrolling down, and implemented. Again, key in how they're evaluated. That's important. It's important when we do public health interventions, we evaluate how successful they are. So we talked about this when we discussed the iterative approach. We come up with we notice there's an issue, we develop interventions which we think will help improve the issue, we implement them, then we measure what's happened, and then we feed that back into the iterative cycle. So stuff there in Europe, details of Danish and Italian guidelines. Many of these are in graphic format, so we'll just have a look at some of these. So the Irish food pyramid, Swiss food pyramid. If you look in these a bit detailed, you see some of them are quite different from what we would eat. There's a Belgian one. We'll come to the Spanish one. We notice it's quite, the bigger the area is, the more that should contribute to diet. And this is quite a lot of oil, in this case olive oil, of course, because olive oil and fruits and veg, the so-called Mediterranean diet, are an important part of the Spanish diet. They also include exercise, which many countries do, but this country doesn't. The Greek food pyramid, again, the Mediterranean diet, so they include wine in moderation. The Latvian food pyramid, and a bunch more. The German ones, I think it's a bit out of date now. I've got a more recent link of this. The German food pyramid is rather strange because you had to cross-reference different sizes. It was very sort of technical. The Austrian one, Cindy. What's Cindy? Can't remember what Cindy is. Countrywide integrated non-communicable disease intervention program. So a general one. Then food circles, obviously we well plate the Spanish wheel, and other visual clues, including somewhere down here my favourite, the Hungarian house, which is certainly easy to understand, if perhaps lacking in detail. Anyway, okay, we'll probably come back to other pyramids a bit later on. We'll close that up. Right, okay. I try to avoid lots of text on slides, but this quote from EU Fixed Resource is a good summary of why dietary guidelines are used. I'm not going to read it out. You can pause the video or look at the presentation. Many people in the general public find nutrition information complex, as we've discussed, and it's hard to relate sometimes to their overall diet. So I've highlighted in red there. It's essential that we provide nutrient advice in a way that consumers can understand. If you look even wider, the World Health Organization's Food and Agriculture Organization provides a global standard for food-based dietary guidelines, and much more in health. The resource has had FP DG for many countries outside Europe. Here's the image for Sierra Leone in South Africa. Note it's very much more plant-based than a Western diet. So I think we'll probably look in there. Okay, so here we are at the FAO. Background, regions, resources, lots of stuff involved in that. And then we can look at different countries. So, for example, if we pick somewhere fairly randomly, we'll pick Benin for the first one. So the food-based diagram. Now, Benin is based on the shape of a traditional African house. So obviously a culturally familiar image. Published in 2005, revised every 5 years. I was going to look at Germany, wasn't I? Because I think that's different now from the one that was in the EU FIC one. Yeah, they've now got a nutritional circle. Interesting, their dietary guidelines go back to 1956. Okay, so you can explore that yourself, and it's well worth having a look at these. There's lots of interesting. It's interesting to see different perspectives. So look at Uruguay. Let's have a look at Uruguay while we're here. So they again have a food wheel. So have a look at them yourself. You'll say it's quite interesting. Okay, here's some background reading for you to do. Read what the FAO has to say on food-based dietary guidelines and decide what you think are the most important issues. It's a tutorial activity, so we will come back to this a little bit later on. Okay, here's another one. In the resource we've just been looking at, pick a country and briefly summarise in your own words who the guidelines are aimed at, what the basis of the FBDG is in this particular country, and how practical they think you are. Obviously, it may be a country which is very different to us, but it's worthwhile having a think about it. Not excellent, perhaps. Iceland is now in the North Atlantic, of course. Its main exports are fish and fish products. The dietary guidelines here are aimed at people over 2 in contract. UK dietary guidelines suggest between the age of 2 and 5 children should start moving towards this model. Here the Icelandic one is a 6-part food circle comprising fruits and vegetables, cereals and cereal products, dairy products, animal food sources and nuts, oils and various fats. I think visible fats, I think that's meant to be various fats. An example food plate is also used to show portion size, and that seems like a good idea. It's interesting to note that even with a diet likely to be high in fish, vitamin D supplements are recommended during the not long Nordic winter. So, how do they work? How effective they are, honestly, it's a bit harsh to say. We don't know. It's difficult to get evidence of this. It's not very surprising. Cause and effect are very hard to establish, especially when we're looking over national populations over long periods of time. The effects of interventions are generational, at least in terms of possible beneficial health effects. One of the reasons we eat 5 a day is to reduce the risk of conditions such as cancer and heart disease in populations. These effects necessarily take decades to establish, and there will be a great many confounding factors. That is, factors that influence the thing we are trying to measure, or the thing we are trying to improve in terms of the intervention. One of the tutorial activities from the original lecture was have a look at what you think the most important issues are in UK nutrition. This should give you some ideas what the factors are if you have a look at this particular report here. Here's a recent paper showing the difference between recommended and actual intake in a range of food groups. This is part of a table showing the differences. I haven't included all of it for space reasons. Green indicates positive values, that is to say people of a given region on average eat more than recommended intake for a particular food group. Red values indicate that people are consuming less than the recommended amounts. This is a bad thing, but is overconsumption in some categories always a good thing? Look at the whole table, which we can talk about a bit later. Another issue identified by the authors is how confident they are in the results. And this is a big issue. How good is the data? Green indicates low uncertainty. That is to say they're reasonably confident the results for consumption versus recommended values are probably accurate. Red indicates the results are highly uncertain. UK is orange, so not particularly confident. Papers in the Blackboard folder and lecture notes, have a read of it. It's also accessible in a link online from the previous page. Okay, 5 a day, since we mentioned it. A good question to start is, What is a portion in grams? Do you know this? It's about 80 grams, but how useful is that? Often something visual can help in understanding, which again links to concepts like universal design for learning, which we'll discuss in a lecture that's coming up fairly soon. Okay, the National Diet and Nutrition Survey. Since 2008, it's been assessing food consumption, nutrient intake and nutrient status across the UK. There have been surveys done before this, but this takes a slightly different approach. As usual, if you click on the link, it will take you to some information about it. It involves a 4-day diet diary, anthropometric measurements and physiological measurements. You will be collecting and analysing a diet diary as part of the assessment for food science and nutrition in semester 2. Anthropometric measurements, which Laura will talk to you about, include height and weight, from which BMI is calculated, waist and hip circumferences, and blood pressure, and a range of other measures. The physiological measures used by the National Survey include the collection of urine to assess salt levels and also iodine and various other micronutrients, and blood for the measurement of folate. So if you click on the image below, it'll take you a review of the first 9 years of the survey. In key categories such as 5 a day, average national intake is below recommended levels. And there's a summary there of some of the headlines. But if you're interested, read the paper. It's well worth reading for some good context. So this is a graph showing adults who eat 5 or more portions of fruit and vegetables a day, and it's consistently below 30% of the population. Okay, that completes that lecture. It was a fairly abrupt end there, but it is. We'll be back with a different topic later. Thanks for listening.